Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron. This is season 4, and it is my privilege to host this show where I get to talk with thought leaders and experts from all over the world. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started.
When we are universally designing learning, we are designing learning so all kids have the conditions they need to make significant progress academically, behaviorally, socially, and emotionally. And when kids are not there yet, we simply ask ourselves, what are the barriers that we haven't eliminated? It's not quality. It's just there are barriers here in the design. And if we work together with families, with leaders, with each other, with kids, we can figure out how to minimize or ultimately eliminate those barriers so we have all kids making growth.
My guest today is Katie Novak, and she is here to help us move past the mythical average student and design classrooms to leverage universal design for learning and MTSS. Katie has written 16 books, and her motto is do it with purpose, do it with heart, and make it fun along the way. She's a high energy and fantastic speaker. So get ready to take notes. I encourage you to use her technique of pausing about every 10 minutes or so you can process the insight she's sharing. Let's go.
Welcome. I'm Eric Byron, and today I have with me Katie Novak. She has 25 years of experience in education, a doctorate degree, and real-world experience as a former teacher, curriculum coordinator, and assistant superintendent of schools. She is the go-to expert for making Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, MTSS, and inclusive education not just accessible, but engaging. She's an instructor at the University of Pennsylvania and the author of 16 books. Katie lives by one rule: do it with purpose, do it with heart, and make it fun along the way. Welcome to the show. We are going to make it fun.
Thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to have a fun conversation with you.
Good. Yes, that is part of my style. I got to have fun everything I do. Let's dig in a little bit, though. I want to understand some of your kind of background and how we got where we are. So if I'm following your profile correctly, you started Novak Education back in 2011. Well, you were still at Chelmsford School. And then today, you've published the 16 books. You have a lot to share.
I am so lucky to have so much to share. And I actually became a consultant by accident. Okay. It was never anything that I set out to do. It wasn't a goal of mine. I was teaching 7th grade. I love 7th graders. I taught 7th grade for 10 years. I started at high school and thought I was going to be a high school teacher for life. And then I moved back to where I grew up. I looked for a new job, couldn't find a high school job. I'm like, I'll just take middle school as a quick pause. And then as soon as I have an opportunity, I'll transition. And I fell in love with them. But while I was a teacher, I was working in a school district that provided us with professional development in something called Universal Design for Learning. And I went all in. And the organization that trained me, they're out of Harvard University. It's called CAST. And they were like, wow, you're really into this. It would be so cool if you could come to our summer institute at Harvard University to talk about Universal Design for Learning. So the first time I ever presented in front of other adults was at Harvard University to talk about what I was doing as a 7th grade teacher. And middle school teachers, we're a little off our rockers, right? I come in with a laundry basket full of groceries. I decide I'm going to give a traditional lesson in making salsa if I did it in a really inaccessible way. And then how would I transform it? And afterwards, everyone started coming up to me saying, hey, do you have a business card? I'm like, for what? I teach 7th grade. Why do I need a business card? So it started there, interestingly.
Okay. So is there a theme, though, that kind of runs through all? It sounds basically the UDL runs through all of it. But how did that kind of, so you were at Chelmsford and then you went to the Groton Dunstable. School district. And your books, certainly the common theme through the books is UDL. So how did that all kind of transpire?
So I have always been just like a huge champion and advocate for inclusion. My mom, you were born with this like thread in your veins that like I was always somebody who was going to look out for anyone who I felt like was experiencing injustice in any way. I'd come in hot. And it was always something I cared deeply about. And so as a teacher, I love teaching middle school, but I was like, where are all the other kids? Like, why do we have all of these separate programs? Can't I just provide the programming myself? And so it really comes from a place of believing deeply in the fact that we really can be successful together when we get the conditions right. I've always had this kind of bend towards trying to make people feel included. I want people to be around me and go, wow, like when I'm around her, I feel like she sees me as I am and she likes me for who I am. And I felt that always my whole life. And so when I learned about this concept of universal design for learning, which is how do you design something that truly works for everyone, it like just created this foundation that explained a lot of what I believe. And so I talk a lot in analogies. And if I were to invite everyone listening, the millions of people listening to this podcast right now, right? If I were to invite you over for dinner at my house and I were to say, I am so happy you're here, welcome. I have made like the most amazing, delicious steaks and I've gotten this vintage red wine and it's amazing. I'm so happy you're here. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the quality of an amazing farm-raised steak and wine, but goodness gracious, we know that some people have plant-based diets and many people have sober lifestyles, and that's not going to work for everybody. And I think that so often in education, we're thinking about creating something that is high quality without recognizing that it's just not working for everyone. And everyone deserves a space where they have the conditions that they need to work towards the same goals. And that really is universal design for learning in a nutshell. How do we design something that's flexible enough to work for everyone as they work towards firm goals and flexible means? And so for me, the dinner party analogy makes sense, whereas if I was inviting everybody to my house, I could say, hey, listen, I'm going to do steak and grilled veggies and a salad, and I always have coffee and some wine and some water, but why don't we like potluck this? Why don't we decide what this looks like together so that we can all have a delicious meal that meets our needs? And there's something really beautiful about how we can co-create something that works for everyone that's actually less work for me as a designer. And so when I learned about this as a teacher, I was all in. I started sharing it with other people. The reason that I shifted to administration was because I loved working with educators so much. I love seeing kids go, oh my gosh, I can do this. And I felt the same way about working with colleagues, that when I was able to say, this is how I used to do it. And it was high quality. I don't want to minimize that. It just didn't work for all kids. And then I started doing it this way and I found more balance and kids had better outcomes. And you can do this too. And I just wanted more time to be able to balance being an educator and then being a consultant. And so that's why I shifted into administration. And I've been doing consulting full time while always staying grounded in teaching graduate courses. I always see myself as a teacher first, but it really is about working with people who are working so hard. I would argue too hard to not have better results for all kids. And there's a different way to do it to ensure that we have better outcomes, we're finding balance, and we're working with our learners and not for our learners to help them be successful.
Yeah. All right. So let's give a practical example in the classroom. So you're teaching 7th grade. What subject are you teaching?
I teach English.
English. Okay. So you're teaching English. Compare for me the old way, limited options, but high quality, versus what it looks like with universal design.
Oh, I love this question. Okay, so the old way would be I would choose a text and I would say, this is a great text and I want you to read it because it's this like really important, profound text. Let's say The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, right? And so I'm like, here's the hard copy of the text. And I would get students excited, understanding who is this author? What is the setting? And then I would say, now you're going to read this text, which is a very high quality text. And then you're going to maybe write an open response. And that means that as you're reading, you're going to be annotating that text. You're going to be be writing the response in hard copy. I'm going to grade the response, and then based on that feedback, you can revise it. And again, that's a very classically designed lesson in almost every subject area, right? When you're talking about like your core, your world languages, your mathematics, your sciences, your social sciences, that it's often like, here is a high quality artifact. The expectation is that you're able to decode it, to comprehend it, and then you're going to write a response. And what I realized, it was very similar in an inclusive class to my steak and wine analogy, is that some of my students, as I became more inclusive, didn't have the decoding skills or the language background or even the comprehension skills to independently get really great information out of that text. And then because I was asking all of them to write in hard copy, there were some students who had dysgraphia, who really struggled to share their thinking in writing. And that wasn't the goal, right? The goal was actually, I want you to comprehend deeply this grade level text and then share with me, let's say, what you understand or what you've learned about how the setting really impacts the characters, thereby recognizing that our come from place helps to develop who we are. Right? Like setting impacts characters, and where we are impacts who we become in some way. And so when I started thinking about universal design, the first thing was just really realizing the barriers that were inherent in read a hard copy of this book and write a response. And so I started saying, okay, this is a high quality text and I want students to have access to this text, but how can I ensure everyone understands and values this text? And so I could say, all right, so here's the text. I'm still going to build background. I'm still going to have you think about your come from place. What is the best way for you to go through these vignettes? Is it to read it in hard copy and annotate it? Is it to maybe access it digitally, which would allow a first read in a translation before you read in English, so you could work on language objectives, or to listen to it while you're reading it to help with the oral fluency piece? Or is it better to be in a small group and do a reader's theater where you choose somebody with strong oral fluency who's going to read out loud? Maybe somebody else is in charge of acting out what they're imagining, and someone else is working on sketching out what they're seeing because they're an artist, right? Which of those actually works best for you? And just as in a dinner party, I would lay out the options, I would do the same thing in my classroom, is to say, you know what, I want you to fall in love with your life as a reader. And which of these experiences, based on how you're feeling today, based on what you know about like your own strengths and limitations, your stamina, how do you want to access this text today? Which of these actually works best for you? And then I want you to share what you've learned about characterization and setting. And so maybe I have a very clear rubric about the student is able to communicate how the setting impacts the characters, but maybe they could do that in a formative assessment where they can make a video and they can pretend they're the character and they're explaining what they've learned. They could absolutely write it if that's something that works really well for them. They might do diary entries or social media posts. Imagine that you're this character today and you're looking back on your come from place and what does that look like, right? And then that formative assessment, once I understand, okay, everybody really does understand this concept of setting, characterization. Now let's talk about how we take these ideas and let's talk about the genre of like informative writing. Mm-hmm. And that genre has multi-steps. So as you're brainstorming, do you want to talk about how you're going to translate your ideas into writing? Do you want to start filling out a graphic organizer or an outline? Is it better for you to just take a minute to process? And then when you're drafting, do you want to do it by hand? Do you want to type it with your fingers? Do you want to type it with your voice? And so like I realized that the core, the rigor of the task was like grade level text, ultimately understanding that text, and then maybe responding in writing. But you can explode those verbs because reading comprehension is not the same as foundational reading. And my job as a year 7 teacher was to make sure that kids could access grade level text. And if I had students who were not yet reading at grade level in 7th grade, they need a supplemental reading class. They need a reading specialist. We should do everything in our power to make sure that our students are literate, because having an opportunity to read the world around you provides you with freedoms that you wouldn't have otherwise. But we can't like create this opportunity gap where we say students who don't have the ability to decode also don't get grade level text. No. And so again, before you'd walk into my classroom and you'd see kids in rows, and I loved them deeply. I loved my kids. I loved being a teacher, but you would see them in rows reading silently and writing on worksheets. And then after I learned about UDL, you would walk in and you would see some students in small groups, some students on devices, some students working with me, some students with noise canceling headphones. There would be hard copies, there'd be earphones, audiobooks. Kids are drawing on the board, kids are laying on their bellies. Like it became a space of like really deep active learning as opposed to a traditional model of what many people believe classrooms should look like, which do not translate very well to what we want to see in the world of work.
Oh, this is so awesome. That was a great example. And I love that the kind of the root of it, though, is that realization that there's a core learning objective here. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
a task and an assessment, yes, it's getting to what did they learn? Did they understand the concept? And so when we strip out the mechanics and say, how do I get you there?
Yeah.
Then that makes perfect sense. So this is good. This gives us a good kind of baseline too to understand what some of this stuff is. Let's talk a little bit about MTSS and UDL because I believe they're complementary, right? But
Yep.
is multi-tiered system of support, right? For
Yep.
those of us who don't like acronyms, is it a prerequisite for getting to UDL, would you say?
This is a little bit of a chicken and an egg conversation because we have this concept of universal design for learning. And then we have this framework of a multi-tiered system of support. And for all y'all listening, the best way for me to explain a multi-tiered system of support, Eric, when you and I were in person together in Hong Kong, I explained it this way, is I like to take the acronym MT in one hand, SS in the other hand, and break them in half, right? So on one hand, we have this MT, this multi-tier, which is tier one, everyone included in first best instruction, aligned to grade level standards, aligned to the core values of the school. We want to create an experience because in our vision, in our mission of every school, we say, we believe all kids are capable of success. We want all kids in this school to have opportunities to go out and reach their highest potential. And so what is the experience that we are making a commitment to our families and our community that we will provide this experience to all kids? That's your tier one. And we also acknowledge, just based on our beautiful variability and the fact that all of us have tremendous strengths and also limitations, realistic limitations, there's going to be some students that are going to need additional support for them to reach their highest potential. We're not going to replace that tier one experience that we believe in deeply, but we need additional support. And that could be additional support in terms of having to address lagging skills for students, let's say, who aren't decoding yet at grade level, or who have really significant support needs when it comes to social emotional wellness or executive function. But it can also mean acceleration and enrichment, where you have some students who come in who are twice exceptional, who are highly capable, who can already master what the grade level expectations are. And we have to think about, are we providing additional support for students who have these needs for enrichment as well? And then you, of course, have your individualized supports available for students who need them. And that's like really intensive support. And the idea is that everybody has access to these multi-tiers when they need them. But important language around MT is supplement, not supplant, is you want to try to create a system that allows every student to get first best instruction and additional. The issue is that we weren't really built to do that well. And so a lot of the times when students need additional support, we end up pulling them out of that tier one experience. We put them in other programs, we put them in other classes. And so the SS part of the multi-tiered system of support is really about how is the system, how is the school built to allow the MT, the multiple tiers, to function. And so the system of support is everything. It's the professional development, it's the schedule, it's the high quality instructional materials, it's the leadership, it's the family and community engagement. The system of support is literally everything. And so to build a multi-tiered system of support, we need a vision for a universally designed tier one, because if we cannot eliminate the barriers that are preventing all students from reaching their highest potential in inclusive classrooms, the whole system breaks down because that's the foundation of the system. That being said, without strong leadership, without professional development, without innovative technologies, which are the system of support, it's really difficult to create a universally designed first best instruction. And so I'm not sure if I would argue that you need the system of support to universally designed instruction, or if you need universally designed instruction as a foundation to create a system of support, because
Right.
the answer is probably they're both working on each other all the time.
Yeah. Good answer. I like that.
I love the question. I don't know if
Yeah,
anyone's ever really asked that.
really? Okay. This is what I do. I ask questions. I don't have answers. I just ask questions.
I love that. It's a great skill.
Yeah. All right. I want to talk about balance because it feels there's a challenge here, right? I get that we want to be proactive, right? And
Yeah.
we want to design for everyone's needs. But isn't there a risk that we try too hard to cover every possible student need and learner profile and get bogged down in all those accommodations?
If I was going to be making individual accommodations for every student, I believe I would be bogged down. And we definitely don't want to be focusing on like the individual accommodations, but rather the barriers of one size fits all. And an example that I give, I have 4 kids. I'm a mom of 4. I have 3 teenagers and a 10-year-old. They're amazing. And if I were to make a delicious omelet in the morning and serve it to all of my kids, 3 of them wouldn't eat it. Right. I know that to be true, right? I have picky kids. There's some dietary differences. And so regardless of the quality of the omelet, I am now stuck having to figure out how I'm going to feed the other 3. So I've already done the work, right? I've already created the omelet. And I think teachers, a lot of the time, they'll come in, hopefully, fingers crossed, with a guaranteed viable curriculum. They'll come in with some high quality scope and sequence documents where it's this really is what all students have to know and do. And so some of that work is done. Let's call that the omelet. And then we're like, uh-oh, this isn't going to work for all the kids that I have. So now I'm going to start making them individual things. That is not sustainable. So that would be me saying, okay, so now I'm going to make my daughter Aylin a yogurt parfait, and I'm going to make my son Bowden some chocolate chip pancakes, and I'm going to make Brecken some oatmeal with cinnamon and apples and a chai latte. And that's essentially what they're into right now. That's only 3 of them. And many teachers might have 25, 30, right? When we're talking about our colleagues in music and PE, we could be talking hundreds. They see every kid in the school. That is not happening. And so what I realized is even when I was making them all their individual meals, they would come down and be like, I'm not in the mood for that today. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so what I realized was that if I taught them how to use the tools, the toaster, the air fryer, the microwave, the blender, and I made sure that they understood the ingredients that were available, I can have them make their own breakfast. And so the same is true in the classroom in many ways, that it's not that I'm saying I have to make 25 individual meals, but what really is the goal and what flexibility exists within the negotiable like command words or the verbs of those goals. And then how do I kind of lay out those options, but it doesn't always have to be me who comes up with the options. And so I think that as educators, we're assuming or we're making this assumption based on past practice rather, is that I plan during my planning period. I plan when I go home at night. But there's something really beautiful about saying to students, all right, this is ultimately what you have to know and be able to do. This is the goal. This is non-negotiable. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. Here's the learning objectives. And this is the success criteria. This is the rubric that we're going to use. And maybe there's exemplars and maybe there's checklists and maybe there's models, but like really taking the time to say, this is ultimately where we are headed. And this can be done. I've seen it done in kindergarten, in pre-K, all the way up to when we're working with high school or students who are in DP programs. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And now let's take a step back. Let's reflect deeply and let's think about what are some options? Where does flexibility exist? And so I talk a lot about content standards versus method standards, which is really the nature of the verb in the standard. And so many of us have lots of standards that are synonymous in some way, albeit at different depths of knowledge, with the word analyze, right? Students will analyze, students will explain, justify, synthesize, evaluate, interpret, communicate, right? None of those say in writing by holding a pencil in a Talon grip with paper that is lined, right? Is like a lot of the traditional model is like, that's the way we're supposed to do it. And there's nothing wrong with doing it that way as an option. But we know that just based on human diversity, it's not going to work for everybody. And so instead of me trying to say to every student, like, what are you going to do? I love to say, okay, here's the verb. How do you want to explain it? You decide.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. Let's pull a community circle together. Let's work on our interpersonal speaking and listening. Let's work on like consensus building, throwing ideas out, very important life skill, very important relationship skill. And so let's just think, how is it that you might be able to meet the criteria on this rubric? How do you want to do it? And so at a very early level, like I've seen kindergarten students where the teacher will say, we've spent the last 6 weeks just learning how to log onto our iPads so we could get onto something like an IXL math to practice math facts, but that's not the only way we can practice math facts. Let's just talk about what are some ways that you can practice counting. Let's go around and let's honor some of those ideas and create like a little mini choice board for today that 3 of our own ideas become options.
Right.
And so like this idea of I have to be the one, I think that what teachers can bring forward is a deep understanding of the nature of their discipline, which is this is the content, this is what you have to know. But teachers are creative. And when you step back and you say, the most important skill right now that the World Economic Forum says is going to shepherd us into the future is the ability to critically think and analyze deeply, because we're becoming more and more, we're coexisting more and more with artificial intelligence and robots. And it's the people who can look at that and say, wait a second, is that actually right? How do I think deeply? How do I think critically? How do I analyze the results through my personhood and say, is this really what's best? That's the skill. And we can build that every single day in our classrooms with our learners and not at home by ourselves for our learners.
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick commercial break. This is not a paid advertisement, but I'd like to take the opportunity to plug the human intelligence movement. I do this in every show because I'm a fan of the work that they're doing. So the mission of the human intelligence movement is to ensure that all students have the skills they need to thrive in a world with AI. So I've got a link in the show notes. Please go check that out, and I hope you get involved. Now, back to my conversation with Katie Novak, as she reinforces this theme of firm goals, flexible means. And we dig into pacing and how blended learning actually can be leveraged within UDL. So we're just getting to the really, really good stuff here. Keep listening.
Yeah. So I'm going to simplify because I'm a simple guy. So
I love it.
Part of what I heard there was the teacher's goal is to make sure they're really clear on the what, right? What's the content? What's the learning objective? But the how is much more free form.
Yep. So the thing that we say all the time in UDL is firm goals, flexible means.
Yes.
That's the mantra, firm goals, flexible means. And so someone will say, but what if the goal is writing? I'm like, then everyone's producing writing. If the goal is writing, everyone's producing writing. However, as a professional writer, I can tell you that I do not sit down and I do not have to go through a formulaic process. So as a teacher, I always made students fill out a graphic organizer. As a professional writer, I would never fill out a graphic organizer. It doesn't serve me as a learner. I like to outline instead of doing like these big. So I'm more of, and in some ways, maybe you could argue that's graphic, but I go old school, Roman numerals. I really find that outlining is much more beneficial for me as a writer, but I didn't give my writers the opportunity to try different ways to organize their writing. It's this is the way you organize writing. Yeah. This is how you organize it this is how you organize if it's that. And I'm not in any way opposed to a no thank you bite, because I think that sometimes that students don't really know what works best for them until they've tried all the options. And I might say something like, I'm going to provide you with explicit instruction. And here's the research on why explicit instruction is very valuable if it is accessible. So I'm always going to make sure that I'm pausing and resetting about every 10 minutes to allow your working memory to catch up, to process. And during that time, it's really valuable for you to make notes. Now, I'm using very intentional language here. I don't want people to take notes. I think a lot of us are like, copy what I wrote on the board. That is not a very useful exercise if you don't understand what you're copying. It's like, how do you make meaning of what you said? And I'm always presenting with a slide deck. So there's some visual elements. There's always going to be an opportunity for me to talk through it. And then I like to pause. I do this in every presentation I give about every 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay, let's just take a minute and think about what was the purpose of that 10 minutes? What was I trying to explain? And in your own way, summarize that, right? What did you learn? Connect with it. Interpret what I said through your own lens. Question it, right? And then think about the best way for you to make meaning. Is it to have a conversation with each other? Is it to come over and ask me a question? Is it to make notes? And there are a number of really great ways that I want you to internalize and make your own so that you understand how you can set yourself up for success. And there has to be some trial and error in that, and that's okay. And so like that for me is firm goals, flexible means, but with the appropriate scaffolding so people really understand that flexible mean. Because I wouldn't just say to my kids, go down and make breakfast if I haven't taught them how to use the tools, if I haven't shown them a couple of different recipes to say, here's some things that you might want to try, and then you can make it work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things I think is worth mentioning in the context of this too, in this kind of giving kids options and helping them figure out what works for them, there's also some self-awareness, emotional intelligence even, that also helps get dialed in there. I understand myself better by realizing that, oh, I tried to do it this way. It sounded good to me, but it actually didn't work very well. And the next time I tried a slightly different approach. And on the learning side too, my own learning experience and the way I go about trying to digest something and understand it and really get to the meaning, and my own meaning, right, may be different than your meaning, and that's okay. That self-awareness that you get out of that process, I think, is important as well for teachers to realize that, yeah, every kid may come away with a slightly different version of what they learned. It may impact them differently, and that's okay too. Yeah.
Yeah. The idea of equitable opportunities to learn does not mean we're all going to have the same exact outcomes, because we're not robots. The intention is not that we all end up at the same exact place. Again, like, I'm deep on analogies. Anyone listening is like, yeah, we get it. You love analogies. But if all of us went to a fitness gym, a studio, right? And there's a weight room and there's yoga class, right? Even though all of us, right? You and I right now, Eric, we go to the gym and we have access to the same instructors, right? And we have opportunities to use the same machines, right? And we're working towards the fitness goal of just being a healthier version of ourselves, right? It doesn't mean that ultimately we're going to run the same speed. We're not going to both run a 5-minute mile. We're not going to both bench press 300 pounds. And in no way, shape, or form should that detract from having the opportunities to have the same type of experiences as the people who will run a 5-minute mile, who will bench 300 pounds. And so I think sometimes people are like, are we really going to end up with everybody at the same exact level? And it's, I don't know where everybody's going to end up. But because I don't know that, I will never, ever stop trying. So it's like, we have to realize that we have to believe that people can be successful when we get the conditions right. And that is leaders, that is teachers, that is students. And the right conditions for me might not be the right conditions for you.
Yeah.
And like, how do we just recognize that as we extend beyond school into careers, into acts of service, into military, into relationships, you really do, when you set a goal, have to say, like, how do I set myself up to reach that goal? And the more that we know ourselves and we're monitoring our progress, the more successful we'll be anywhere. And traditional school didn't necessarily provide us all with that. It was like, if you can't do it that way, choose another goal and not choose another path, and maybe you can get to that goal another way.
Yeah. So let's talk about one other dynamic. I don't know if you've experienced any place yet that allows flexibility around time. So traditionally, school is very time boxed.
Yeah.
We have our curriculum laid out, and year one, you're going through this curriculum, and year two and whatever, and there's standardized tests in many cases, particularly here in Asia, and everybody has to follow the same basic timing. But in reality, we all learn at a different speed as well. So does UDL in some instances provide for flexibility there that says, oh, you're fast in this particular area, so I'll give you more content because you can consume it faster, but somebody else needs a little more time. And so instead of saying you have this week and done, we're moving on, even if you didn't get there, we're moving on because the curriculum has to move on. Is there a system of support around
Yeah.
that allows for the slower student to get enough time to get there eventually instead of
Yeah.
being left behind and said, oh, nope, we're all moving on now because we're all tier one has a time to it.
So that would start stepping over into the operationalization of UDL using blending learning models. Blended learning does allow for flexibility in like the pathways that students are taking, but also in the pacing. And for instance, one very common blended learning model is called the learning playlist. And a lot of people think, oh, playlist, like a music playlist. And it's more of a music playlist is you're going through songs. You do the first song and then you move to the second song, then you move to the third song, then you move to the fourth song. Blended learning playlist is essentially a to-do list of learning tasks that blend opportunities to work with teachers in small groups and get explicit instruction, opportunities to learn online, and opportunities to get away from the screens and have more relational learning, opportunities to process without the screen there, etc. And so the concept of blended learning is a blend of those different kind of pedagogies, right? We know that there's value in relational explicit instruction. We know that there's value in using technological tools that can adapt, that can innovate in ways humans can't. And we know that just the relational, being able to work together, to collaborate, to cooperate, to be mindful without technology, those are all important things. So how do we blend them together? But one of the models is essentially this recognition is that pacing is going to be differentiated. And so if I set up a unit as a playlist, I might say something like, we're all going to start together and I'm going to provide you with some framing. This is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And then you're going to start working through the playlist. So the first thing, let's go back to Sandra Cisneros, right? Let's say that I set up the unit like a playlist. It might be something along the lines of, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to decide for the first week of this unit, do you want to work by yourself? Do you want to work with a partner? Or do you want to work with a small group of 3 or something like that? And step 1 is to decide how your group's going to read the first 3 vignettes. So do you want to read it out loud? Do you want to access a audio version of it? Do you want a hard copy of it? And then you're going to decide how you want to make your thinking visible in terms of, is it annotations? Is it discussion, the note taker? Is it sketch notes? And then you're going to answer a target question in any way that you choose. And it could be like posting a video. It could be writing a response. It could be coming over and talking to me. But the idea would be that you check in with me after that task and I can release you to your next task. And so if students did not get it yet, I might be like, nope, you cannot move on yet. You're going to sit with me. We're going to go back into the second vignette. There was definitely a misinterpretation there, right? And so you're going to check in with me. Okay, now you're ready. Now you can go on to the next part. Whereas other students might be more mindful. They might need more time. And so that is a great way to build in a little bit of flexibility. You're always going to have to innovate inside the box because at some point you have to move on or you won't be able to provide students with access to all the different opportunities they need. But I think in terms of like extended time, reading pace, I was always a very fast reader. It's not that my comprehension is stronger, but my comprehension is as strong at a 1.5. So I listened to all of my audiobooks on a 1.5. And so when teachers would give us opportunities to read, I was always done early and I'm very friendly and a talker. And so I would always give people problems because I was literally done. I wasn't rushing. I could just read faster than other people, just like some people can run faster than other people. And then I would distract everyone else who was still reading. And it would be better for me to have something else to move on to. And so some people will say, you must go through all of these things. And when you finish, now here's a choice board of things that you can do. And that's when you can get into the novelty, into the enrichment, into more of these like kind of passion projects, in addition to you have not just rushed through it, but you've shown mastery of it. And so blended learning playlists have check-in points with educators. You could do it like even on Google Forms, where it's like you have to get this grade on the quiz before you can move on. And people say, but is that going to end up with this big rush of kids suddenly queuing? You have to have routines for that. If you see I'm already with a group, here's some things you can do while you're waiting for me. It's all about just very basic relational classroom kind of management pieces. But I have found that most of the time, if you were to add like an extra 50% of time on things, you can get almost everybody together again. And so that would be like one example, but I'm sure there's other examples. But I think that in some ways, leveraging both universal design for learning and blended learning models within a tier 1 classroom of a multi-tiered system of support will allow more students to have their needs met. I think that as we are seeing things that are a little bit more flexible in terms of hybrid courses and online courses, those aren't necessarily bound by your traditional, this is released this week, this is released this week. And I think that we're going to see more of that in the future, where students are able to maybe move through things faster as technology becomes a little bit more nimble.
Yeah, I actually suspect that in most classrooms, many students could go faster.
Yeah.
That we've had a tendency to slow down to an average on what we think is a norm. Or I think, as I recall you saying, there is no average student. That's
Right.
a fictitious kind of thing we like to think of. We teach to the average student who doesn't exist. Yeah.
Mythical average.
The mythical average. Yeah. All right. Tell me a success story. Some school you went into that, I don't know, you came out and, okay.
Just so many success stories. I think that educators in general, schools in general, are so well intentioned, and people are working so hard trying to make this traditional model fit with consistently changing kids. And when you go in, and it's not only about providing professional development. I think that's only the very first part of it. There's the education kind of powerhouse, Tom Guskey. He's been around for decades. He does amazing work he's an education thought leader. And Tom Guskey has something called the 5 levels of professional development evaluation. And because a lot of people think of professional development as being an event. Like I come in and I work with the schools, and participant level 1 is the reaction. Did you like her? Was she knowledgeable? Were you satisfied with the conditions? The coffee was great. The Wi-Fi was strong. She's okay. Yep, satisfied. And that's like level 1. And then level 2 is, okay, so what'd you learn? And people can say, after spending an hour, a couple hours with a great PD presenter or a great educator, it's, oh, I did learn this. That's okay. So what'd you learn? But level 3 is, but how is this going to change how the organization operates? So are you really advocating and supporting this work? And ultimately, that needs to be a very public sentiment. Hey, families, this is the direction we're going in. Ask your kids about it. Kids, this is the type of education you deserve. It's a part of our core values. And this is about pulling together student leadership groups. It's about being really transparent with school boards and families of this is what we know is going to help to prepare our kids for their future. This idea of being self-directed, of being analytical in their thinking. This is going to be a little bit different than the model of education you're familiar with. It is absolutely equally as rigorous, but it is more flexible. And this is what we're doing and why. And we're assuring you we're working towards this. And that also means that if people are not working towards that, it is a problem that needs to be addressed immediately, which is, I see you're having some struggles in transitioning. How do I clear a path to help you? What coaching do you need? What support do you need? What's becoming a barrier for you personally so we can support you through it? But there's no, I want to do it, I don't want to do it. If this is something that the school is saying, we are going to design an education that is both rigorous and students can personalize to best meet their needs, then we need some sort of framework to bring us on the same page. But it's also about how are we providing the resources to support it in terms of common planning, in terms of educators observing each other, in terms of learning walks, instructional rounds, non-evaluative feedback, right? Like, how do we really lean into this? And then ultimately we have to think about how are we going to celebrate and elevate the people who are taking these risks, are doing things differently. And there's going to be short-term impact, bumps in engagement, bumps in creativity. Really changing student learning outcomes takes a while. This is not something that we're going to see in 2 weeks. Woo! All our scores are up. Oh my goodness. Like you can't just suddenly turn that around immediately. So it's like the short term, but also we have to commit to this for months and months to build these routines. So we're really extending and accelerating student outcomes. That's level 3. Level 4 is all about, are people actually doing the thing? Are we changing instruction? What's our instructional data? This is what our classrooms looked like before. This is what our classrooms look like now. And we can validate that not only in observations, but in student feedback, in teacher feedback on their perception of efficacy. I feel prepared to design numerous options and choices for students to learn as they work towards the same goals. And many teachers would say, gosh, I can't really say I feel prepared for that yet. With great professional development and a shift in climate and culture in your professional learning communities, in the way that we observe each other, in how we design our faculty meetings to model this. Level 5 is student outcomes. And I think Gusky is making an argument that I think too often we try to go like 1, 2, 5, get good PD, student outcomes didn't shift, PD wasn't good, UDL doesn't work. And it's because it's like what's happening in level 3, what's happening in level 4. And so for the districts that I've worked with who have had the most significant outcomes in terms of huge instructional changes, classrooms look different. Huge differences in student perception. Kids saying, I have so many choices. I understand what grade level rigor looks like. I really feel like I belong and I'm honored. Families are saying, my kids are building so many more just good learning muscles. They understand what they're learning and why. They understand how to study. Teachers who are saying, I feel so much more prepared to meet the needs of students. I'm experiencing more balance as I'm learning how to work together with my colleagues. Those things will result in incredible student outcomes. I work with one school in Seattle, Washington. The principal is absolutely brilliant. She's exceptional. And in a couple of years of, again, I'm going to put it way more on level 3 and 4 than anything else, but they were able to increase attendance, like chronic attendance, kids who are only missing 2 or fewer classes a month. They were able to increase it by 47%. So they had an attendance rate in 2022 of 40%. It went to 88.7% in 2024. Creating spaces where kids wanted to be, truly doubling attendance. And again, it's not about the professional development because there's nothing that anyone can say in 12 hours that's going to significantly impact, but it can set a fire. It can ignite a match. That same school was able to make 20% increase in significant growth for students with disabilities. So when they're looking at the percentile of growth in 1 year, like coming in, the cohort had only made 17th percentile for growth in a single year, jumping all the way to 37th percentile. So surpassing in the state another 20% of kids in a single year. It like what is possible will blow your mind. And then again, a lot of us are using universal screening tools, MAP, STAR, iReady, Dibble. There's lots of different things. But the same school, again, they were able to move from at the beginning of the year, only 26% of students had met their goal. Right. And in one data cycle, 54% met their goal. Like when we change instruction, when we change teacher perception about like their own efficacy, when we change student perception about what is possible, the outcomes will come, the traditional outcomes, but they're slow and they're steady. And what I would argue is that we can't try this on for a couple of days, a couple of strategies, and go, it didn't work, right? When we are universally designing learning, we are designing learning so all kids have the conditions they need to make significant progress academically, behaviorally, socially, and emotionally. And when kids are not there yet, we simply ask ourselves, what are the barriers that we haven't eliminated? It's not quality. It's just there are barriers here in the design. And if we work together with families, with leaders, with each other, with kids, we can figure out how to minimize or ultimately eliminate those barriers so we have all kids making growth.
Yeah. I related a little bit to back in my corporate IT days and doing large scale projects. And sometimes we used to say that we would come in to help re-engineer, reorganize, transformation. Everybody likes to use the word transformation. We didn't call it that back then, but process re-engineering. But a lot of times you went through this dip, and we used to say the problem it isn't that what we just did is causing problems, it's exposing them so you can fix
Yes.
them. And so you're going to have some pain, right, when you start
Yeah.
this process. But we didn't cause those problems. We just exposed them. So now we can fix them. But yes, you were kind of suffering along with these things that you didn't even realize necessarily were holding you back. And now I've ripped the cover off and there they are.
Yeah.
And you're unhappy about seeing them, but don't blame the project. Yes, we're here to help you fix it. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But yes, you got to bear through that process to get to the reward for doing it, which comes later. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Perfect. We're almost at the end of our time here, and I still
So
have so
sad.
many
It went
questions.
by so fast.
Yes, yes. What else should we cover here? What haven't I asked that I should have asked you, Katie?
You asked such good questions. We've covered UDL, we've covered MTSS, we've
Yeah,
covered blended learning. This is a powerhouse podcast right here.
it
This
is.
could be like 3 different episodes. I think that I'm going to ask myself, do you believe that it's possible for us to really transform education? And I really do. I really do. Some people will say to me, like you're talking about all of these different changes. You're talking about
Mm,
changing schedules, changing PD, changing the way we work together. Do you think it's possible? Absolutely, I think it's possible. And I think it is necessary because what we're doing now isn't working for very many people, right? Even for our kids who are traditionally successful, right? They're very stressed out. I have 3 teenagers who have lots to learn in terms of how they're going to be successful without asking me every single question, right? I'll ask one of my sons to do a favor for me and they'll like call me 3 times in 5 minutes. I'm like, stop calling me, figure it out, right? And so we have kids who are just like, they're very compliant. They want to do well, but they're like, just tell me how to do well. Just tell
yeah,
me how to do it. And the truth is that robots are better at that. They're better at being compliant than humans are. And what we can offer as humans is this self-awareness, this creativity, this connection. And we have to be able to shift our systems to get there. But I think that we have to really reimagine our systems. I don't think it's like, how do we make this work within our current system? I want to invite people to think very differently about the system we inherited. And it's if we could build a different system, what would it look like? Right? It's not how do we make this schedule work? Forget the schedule you have right now. Just forget it. Forget the contract you have right now. Contracts can be amended, right? Schedules can be resurfaced. What would a schedule look like that truly honored what our mission and vision is?
yeah,
Right? If we were going to give kids the best experience possible, what would that actually look like in terms of schedule? And then now let's think about what are all of the different ways that we could get there. But I think that sometimes we're always trying to like make it work. And I believe that the system is very good at getting the results that it gets, and teachers are stressed and students are compliant, and that we need a different system. And I think that if everybody in education really advocated for that system that would better serve our kids, better serve our educators, better serve our families, I think that it would be much more efficient to be able to put some of these things into practice.
yeah. I can say I do this podcast because I also believe we can do better. And I am thrilled to say that in just 2 years of doing this podcast, I have seen amazing innovations and creativity and results. People
Yeah.
are doing things differently, trying things, and there isn't one solution out there. I haven't seen one thing that I would just go, "Oh, we found it. That's it. Oh,
Yeah.
we're done." It's a process, right? It's a work in progress that continually evolves. And I love the work that you're doing. This is awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so beautiful to talk to you.
As Katie points out, we've covered a lot of ground in this episode. So UDL, MTSS, blended learning. We talked about firm goals by flexible means and how you can co-create with students to lessen the burden on teachers to try and come up with all of the various ideas and options that make the learning more accessible to all students. So, change is hard, but the rewards here clearly are significant. It's worth the effort. So students deserve the best possible education in a way that allows all students to, be successful and achieve their learning goals. I'm Eric Byron. Thanks for listening to the Education Innovators Podcast. Thanks to all of those innovators out there like Katie Novak. Keep doing what you're doing. You are making a difference.